It started with a strange sound beneath the waves. A dull thud. Then silence. For years, no one dared to disturb what lay at the bottom of that forgotten bay. Until one day, she did. She wasn't searching for treasure. She wasn't chasing fame. She was just someone who loved bringing old machines back to life. But this time, what she pulled from the depths would change everything. The engine came from a ship that sank decades ago. No one knew the real reason it went down. Some said a storm, others whispered something darker. The wreck had been swallowed by time, the metal body rusted and broken, the engine sealed shut by layers of salt and sand. Most divers avoided it. But when she found it, something about it called to her. It looked ordinary, just another piece of junk. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that this one was different. After weeks of planning, she brought the engine to the surface. It was massive, heavy, cold, and covered in sea growth. Every inch of it looked lifeless, yet somehow preserved. People around her said it wasn't worth it. Too old. Too damaged. But she didn't care. She had restored hundreds of engines before, old cars, motorcycles, even planes, but this one felt personal. As she stood before it for the first time, she noticed something odd. A faint mark on the casing. Letters almost rubbed away. It looked like a name, or maybe coordinates. The metal around it had strange dents, as if something had been forced inside long ago. That was the moment her curiosity turned into obsession. She began cleaning it slowly, layer by layer. The smell of rust filled the air. Mud and small shells fell away with every touch. Beneath all that decay, something was hidden. Something sealed deep within the engine, untouched for decades. And when she realized there was a hollow space where no hollow should exist, her hands froze. Whatever was inside had been waiting for a long, long time. The ship was once called the Marigold *, a small cargo vessel built in the late 1950s. It wasn't famous, not the kind of ship you'd find in history books. It carried supplies across coastal waters, fuel, machinery, sometimes mail. But one night, during a violent storm, it vanished. No distress call. No wreckage spotted for weeks. When the Coast Guard finally found it, the ship was half buried in sand at the bottom of a cold, murky bay. No survivors. No clear reason why it went down. Some said it hit a reef. Others believed it was sabotage. The truth disappeared with the ship. For years, the Marigold * became just another ghost story whispered by local fishermen. They said the water where it sank was cursed. Radios died, compasses spun wildly, engines stalled for no reason. Divers who went down claimed they heard sounds, knocks, faint clanks, as if something was still alive down there. Most stopped going after one diver never returned. People began calling it the engine's graveyard. Then, decades later, she arrived in that same harbor. Her name was Clara. A marine engineer, calm, quiet, and endlessly curious. She had spent most of her life around machines that others had given up on. Broken engines fascinated her, not because they were puzzles, but because they carried stories. Every scratch, every dent meant something. When she heard about the Marigold *, she didn't hesitate. It wasn't the ship that caught her interest, it was the engine. Rumor had it that it was custom-built, unlike anything used at the time. Some said it ran even after the ship started to sink. Clara wanted to see it for herself. She spent months studying blueprints and old records, but there was little information. The engine wasn't listed in any catalogue. No company claimed to have made it. It was as if someone had erased its existence. That only deepened her curiosity. So, she assembled a small team and planned an expedition. The first dive was harder than anyone expected. The current was strong, visibility almost zero. But after several tries, the silhouette of the wreck appeared, dark and heavy, covered in a thick coat of algae. Clara moved closer and saw it, the engine room, half collapsed but still holding the large metal core she had been searching for. The engine was enormous, bigger than she'd imagined. The propeller shaft was twisted, yet the housing looked almost untouched. It was as if the ocean had spared it. It took days to lift the engine to the surface. Even with cranes and air bladders, the weight fought them the whole way. When it finally broke the surface, the water around it turned dark, full of rust flakes and trapped bubbles. Watching it rise felt eerie, like waking something that had been sleeping for too long. Once on land, Clara stood in silence. The engine was coated with layers of sea life, coral growths, barnacles, even small crabs crawling out of its cracks. It didn't look like a machine anymore. It looked alive. Her crew began scraping the surface carefully. That's when Clara saw it again, the strange mark on the casing. Letters and numbers faintly carved into the metal. M374 Delta. She didn't recognize the format. It wasn't a serial number. Not military. Not industrial. Inside the engine were pockets of hardened sand and shells. But as she brushed more away, she noticed that one of the panels didn't match. It looked like it had been welded on later. Different material, different color, smoother. Someone had sealed it deliberately. Her team suggested cutting it open, but Clara refused. She wanted to understand why it was there before touching it. At night, she stayed alone in the workshop, staring at the engine under the soft yellow light. The air smelled like salt and oil. She traced the lines of the casing with her fingers, wondering who built it and why it had been hidden this way. She kept hearing small creaks and pops as the metal dried. Sometimes, she thought she heard a faint ticking from inside. Maybe it was just the cooling metal. Maybe not. The next morning, she decided to dismantle it piece by piece. She wanted to restore it completely, to make it run again. But deep down, she also wanted to know what was behind that sealed panel. No manual, no record, no clue. Just a strange feeling that the story of the Marigold wasn't over yet. And as the first bolts came loose, revealing the inner chambers of the long-lost engine, she began to realize this wasn't just an old machine. Something about it felt intentional. Almost as if someone had wanted it to be found, only when the time was right. The first morning of the restoration began in silence. The engine sat in the middle of the workshop like a sleeping beast, dripping with seawater. Clara circled it slowly, notebook in hand, studying every mark, every dent. She knew this would be the hardest project of her life. The metal was fragile, the bolts were fused with rust, and one wrong move could destroy the entire structure. But more than that, she felt something deeper, as if the machine itself didn't want to be opened. Her first task was simple: remove the outer layers of corrosion. Hours passed as she brushed, scraped, and sanded, uncovering hints of silver beneath the red and brown decay. The room filled with the sound of grinding metal and the sharp scent of oxidized iron. The deeper she went, the stranger the engine looked. Some of the parts weren't standard. The wiring was different. The layout didn't match any known design. It was as if someone had combined several technologies that didn't belong together. Clara paused, wiping her forehead. This wasn't a regular marine engine. Someone had modified it, hidden it in plain sight. But why? She made careful notes, labeling every component she removed. The team helped with cleaning and cataloging, but most of them didn't see what she saw. To them, it was just an old hunk of metal. To her, it was a message waiting to be decoded. Days turned into nights. The engine began to reveal its skeleton, gears, pistons, and chambers long sealed away from air and light. One night, as she pried open a small valve, a strange smell escaped. It wasn't oil or seawater. It was sweet, almost chemical, and it made her step back. She leaned closer, shining a flashlight into the cavity. Inside, she noticed a glint, a smooth, polished surface that didn't belong there. It was too clean to have survived decades underwater. She tried to reach it, but the space was too narrow. Frustrated, she marked the spot and returned the next day with precision tools. When she removed the next layer of plating, she saw something unexpected: a small copper plate with engraved lines running in circular patterns. They looked like symbols, not letters. Some were sharp, some curved, almost like waves. She took a photo and checked online databases, but nothing matched. The symbols didn't belong to any known manufacturer or maritime code. Her curiosity deepened. What kind of engineer would carve symbols into an engine? And for what purpose? The following week was a test of patience. The internal chambers were delicate, filled with mud and sand hardened over time. She used soft brushes, careful not to damage anything that might be underneath. Each stroke felt like uncovering a secret that didn't want to be told. Then, one evening, she heard it again, the faint ticking. At first, she thought it was one of her tools. But when she stopped moving, the sound continued. Tick, tick, tick. Steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It came from deep inside the engine's core. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed her ear to the metal. The sound was real. Impossible, but real. She grabbed her stethoscope, a habit from years of listening to mechanical noises, and placed it on the casing. The ticking grew louder. Not random. Patterned. Almost mechanical in precision. Her hands trembled as she tried to locate the source. It was coming from behind that welded panel. The same panel she had avoided cutting open. Her team thought it was trapped air or the metal cooling, but Clara knew better. The sound was too deliberate. Too alive. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the ticking in her head. What if something was still working inside after all these years? What if someone had designed it to keep running? By morning, she had made up her mind. She couldn't ignore it any longer. She gathered her tools, positioned the lights, and steadied her hand. The first cut sent sparks across the room. The smell of burning metal filled the air. The panel resisted, as if holding back the secret inside. Slowly, she carved around the edges until the final piece fell away with a heavy clang. A rush of cold air escaped, along with a faint shimmer of dust. Inside the hollow chamber, something metallic gleamed under the light, small, cylindrical, perfectly intact. It was wrapped in a layer of oil-soaked cloth. She reached in carefully and lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. The surface was engraved with the same strange symbols. Clara didn't say a word. She just stared at it. Her reflection warped across the metal. The ticking had stopped. The workshop felt colder than before. Whatever was inside that cylinder had been sealed there for a reason. And now, after all these years, it was finally in her hands. Clara held the small cylinder in both hands, her gloves slick with oil. It was cold, colder than the air around her. The surface was smooth, almost mirror-like despite years underwater. The strange symbols shimmered faintly under the light. They weren't random markings. They were deliberate, carved with precision, forming a pattern that seemed to spiral endlessly around the object. She turned it over, searching for an opening, but there was none. No latch, no screw, no seam. Just perfect, seamless metal. Her team gathered around, whispering questions she didn't answer. They could all feel it. Something wasn't right. The engine, the sounds, the sealed chamber, none of it made sense. But Clara wasn't afraid. She was curious. She placed the cylinder on her work table and cleaned it carefully, removing the last traces of silt. The symbols became clearer now, and she noticed something new: tiny indentations between the lines. They weren't decorative. They were coordinates. Numbers, just barely visible. She quickly jotted them down, her hand shaking as she entered them into her tablet. The location that appeared on the map made her heart stop. It pointed to the same bay where the Marigold had sunk. The exact coordinates of the wreck site. It didn't seem possible. How could an object hidden inside the engine be giving directions to the engine itself ? She double-checked, running the numbers again. Same result. The coordinates were identical. The cylinder was some kind of marker. But for what? Clara leaned closer, her breath fogging on the metal. A faint vibration pulsed through her fingertips. It wasn't strong, more like a heartbeat buried deep inside. Her crew noticed it too. "Is it moving?" one of them asked quietly. Before she could respond, a soft click echoed from within the cylinder. Just one, like a lock being released. Everyone froze. The sound faded, leaving an unnerving silence. She didn't dare open it. Not yet. Instead, she decided to find out where it came from. That night, she went through old archives, dusty naval records, and shipping manifests. Nothing. No mention of a custom engine or experimental parts used on the Marigold Star. But there was something else, a name that appeared several times in different reports. A man called Dr. Henrik Vos. Engineer. Inventor. Disappeared in 1961. The same year the Marigold sank. According to an old newspaper clipping, Vos had been working on a government project involving autonomous marine systems. The details were classified, but one thing stood out, a note that read, Prototype M3 was lost at sea during transport. Clara's eyes widened. M3. The same marking etched on the engine casing. The same symbols engraved on the cylinder. Her pulse quickened. The engine wasn't a standard model. It was a prototype, something far ahead of its time. Maybe even dangerous. The next morning, she returned to the workshop early. The air was heavy, still carrying the faint scent of metal and salt. She turned on the lights and froze. The cylinder wasn't where she had left it. It had rolled several inches across the table, leaving a small trail of oil behind. She stared at it for a long moment. No windows were open, no vibration strong enough to move it. She approached slowly, half expecting another click. None came. She picked it up again, holding it close to her ear. Nothing. Silence. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't inert, that it was aware. She decided to run a scan. Using her portable analyzer, she checked its material composition. The readings were inconsistent. Layers of different metals, some common, some unknown. And buried deep inside, a dense core her instruments couldn't identify. The device beeped and flashed red, signaling interference. Then, for a fraction of a second, the lights in the workshop flickered. The machines around her hummed faintly. And just as suddenly, everything went still again. Her crew returned later and found her standing there, eyes fixed on the object. She didn't explain what happened. She simply said, "It reacted." That evening, she examined the engine one last time. There were more symbols, barely visible under layers of grime. When she traced them, she realized they matched the pattern on the cylinder. The engine and the object were connected, part of the same design. But for what purpose? Was the engine a container? A generator? A trap? She placed the cylinder back inside the hollow space where she had found it, just to see if it fit. It slid in perfectly, aligning with the grooves as if it had never been removed. And when it clicked into place, the sound that followed sent a chill through her spine. The lights dimmed again. The old engine gave a low hum, soft at first, then growing louder. For a brief second, one of the gauges on her workbench flickered to life, its needle trembling. Clara stepped back, eyes wide, her breath shallow. The engine, silent for over 60 years, had just taken its first breath again. The low hum deepened, vibrating through the floor. Every loose screw on the workbench trembled. Clara stood motionless, her heart pounding in rhythm with the sound. The engine, dead for decades, was somehow alive. A faint blue light shimmered between the cracks of the metal, seeping out like breath through old lungs. It wasn't electricity, at least not the kind she'd ever seen. It pulsed slowly, almost organically, as though the engine was responding to her touch. Her team rushed in, drawn by the noise. "Is that a generator?" someone shouted, but Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on the light spreading across the engine's body, tracing the same spiral symbols that covered the cylinder. It was as if the machine had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the piece to be returned so it could remember what it was. One of the gauges near the work table flicked on again, then another. Old instruments that hadn't worked in years began to tick and blink, responding to a power source no one could explain. The room grew warmer. The smell of salt and metal filled the air. Every instinct in Clara's body screamed to turn it off, to step back, but another part of her, the part that had followed this mystery from the beginning, urged her to stay. She reached forward and placed a hand on the engine surface. The hum shifted immediately, almost like a response. It grew softer, calmer, but deeper. Her fingertips tingled. A faint vibration traveled up her arm. For a second, she felt connected. She couldn't explain it. There were no words for the sensation, but it felt as though the machine was aware of her presence. Then, just as suddenly, the light faded. The hum weakened, dropping in pitch until it disappeared completely. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Everyone stared, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The engine sat still again, its surface steaming lightly, the cylinder faintly glowing from within. Clara exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She checked her instruments. Every gauge that had flickered to life now pointed to 0. The power surge had left no trace. No electrical reading, no heat spike, nothing. The data logs on her analyzer showed only static. It was as if the entire event had never occurred. But she had seen it. They all had. Over the next few hours, she worked quietly, trying to understand what had triggered the reaction. The cylinder had acted like a key, reactivating something buried inside the engine. But why would a ship's engine need a hidden core? And why hide coordinates inside it? The questions looped endlessly in her mind. At one point, she looked back toward the cylinder and noticed something new. The symbols that once glowed faintly were now burned into the metal, darker and sharper. And between the lines, a small crack had appeared. She picked it up carefully, tilting it under the light. The crack widened slightly, releasing a faint hiss, a pocket of trapped air, maybe. But then something slid out from the opening. It was a thin piece of metal, no larger than a coin, etched with the same spirals and coordinates. On the back, a new line of text appeared, one she hadn't seen before, Project Helix. Property of H. Vose. Her pulse quickened. Project Helix. The same code name that had vanished from naval archives. The one tied to secret oceanic experiments during the Cold War. She looked again at the engine. This wasn't just a machine. It was a prototype from a classified experiment, one meant to harness energy from the ocean itself. A self-sustaining power source, decades ahead of its time. But if that were true, then why did the ship sink? She scrolled through more of her notes, cross-referencing dates and names. The more she found, the stranger it became. The Marigold wasn't carrying cargo. It was carrying the engine. A test voyage. And something had gone wrong. Maybe the prototype overloaded, or maybe someone didn't want it to reach its destination. As she pieced it together, she realized that what she held wasn't just history. It was evidence of something buried deliberately. The government records weren't missing by accident. They were erased. She looked at the engine again. It was quiet now, the blue light completely gone. Yet, for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to shut it down or seal it away. She knew what it could mean, for science, for history, for the people who had tried to keep it hidden. But she also knew that some discoveries refused to stay buried. Outside, the wind began to rise, whistling through the cracks of the old workshop. Clara stood there, the small coin-like fragment in her hand, her reflection flickering in its surface. Somewhere deep inside the engine, something clicked softly, once, like a slow heartbeat. Then silence again. She looked toward the bay through the open door, the water shimmering under the pale morning light. The wreck of the Marigold was still out there, half buried beneath the waves. And now she knew, whatever secret began down there wasn't finished yet.